It's basically that we're opening up our mind for all kinds of thoughts to pop into our heads, and we act on them. And we act on them because we're in front of the world's largest candy store. We can just easily go to a site and satisfy that curiosity.
We are back. Here to talk with me is Gloria Mark. Gloria is a psychologist and a professor at the University of California, Irvine, where she studies attention, how it works, what it does for us, why we are losing control of it. She is the author of a great book on the subject titled Attention Span. I read it this weekend. Gloria, welcome to Offline.
Thanks so much for having me.
So it is no mystery, especially to regular listeners of this show, why our attention is so fragmented these days. We live surrounded all day, every day by devices and apps designed to tax our attention. We face constant interruption and overstimulation. But something that you explore in your work that feels really important to me is that the consequences of this go way beyond just shortened attention span. So can you talk about this idea that attention is a finite cognitive resource and what happens to us when that resource starts to get drained or depleted?
Yeah, the psychological explanation is that our mind has a limited capacity for cognitive resources. You can think of it as attentional capacity. And there's things we do throughout the day that drain this resource. So I like to use the metaphor of a tank, right? And if you get a really good night's sleep, or if you're on a vacation, in fact, I'm going to be going on a vacation pretty soon to Costa Rica, this can replenish your tank of resources. So you are fresh, you're ready, you can dive into whatever task you want to do. But things we do throughout the day tap into this tank and drain it. So one of the big things that drains it is our multitasking. And multitasking doesn't necessarily mean doing two things in parallel, because humans aren't wired to be able to do that unless one of those things is automatic. So I can walk and text because walking is automatic. But as soon as a bicyclist comes along or I'm at an intersection, I'm going to stop texting and pay attention. So I can't do two things in parallel when I'm paying attention to two things. So during the day, we multitask a lot, which means shifting our attention from one thing to another, and we shift it very rapidly. We might start off, for me, I might be writing an article, and then suddenly I have this urge to check email. So I switch to email, or I have an urge to look up something online that's not even related to the thing I'm working on. So that's just an example. And we do this all day. And we have found measurably that people's attention averages about 47 seconds on any screen, computers and smartphones. So we're just continually switching our attention throughout the day. This is not good for those resources because they're draining. Now, another thing that drains resources is our being distracted by all kinds of things. The distractions could be notifications. It could be something even within ourselves, because it turns out that about half the time we tend to interrupt ourselves. We tend to blame all of these interruptions and distractions on some external source, but actually a lot of distraction comes within us. And our distraction to something else takes up cognitive resources. And then we have to pull our minds back and we have to reorient to that place we were before we attended to the distraction. So that's another way our minds get drained.
Can you talk about what happens when that attention gets drained? I know, for example, that you did a study with people where you took them off of email. And so you got to see the difference in what happens when there are people in an office using email, their attention is getting taxed, their attention is getting drained, and people in the office who are not using email, so are not having that experience of their tank being tapped out. What did you learn about what changes for the people who are not having their tank depleted?
The short answer is that people don't get as stressed. So when we're shifting our attention rapidly, we know that it causes stress. So in the research that I do, I use sensors. And rather than bringing people into a laboratory, I go to where people are. And I call this creating living laboratories. And I just equip people with sensors, heart rate monitors. I log computer activity so that we can get a measure of their stress and their attention as they're going about their daily work. And we find that the faster the frequency is of shifting attention, the higher is the stress. And in the study you talked about where we cut off email in an organization for a work week, we found at the end of that work week that people's stress had gone down significantly. So yes, we're using all these very precious cognitive resources to keep track of what's going on, to reorient back to that interrupted task. And it drains these resources and it causes stress. Now, there's a part of our mind that's called executive function. And this is a really important part of the mind. It's probably the most important part. And you can think of it as the CEO of the mind because it helps us with decision making. It helps us pursue goals. And very importantly, it helps us stay on track and filter out distractions. Now, when we get tired, when our mind gets fatigued, it can't do its job to filter out distractions. And so we become even more susceptible to distractions. So we get into this vicious cycle where we get distracted either by something outside of us or something internal to ourselves. This causes us to be stressed. It causes our minds to get fatigued. Our executive function gets fatigued, and then it just can't do its job to help filter out distractions as we go about our work.
I'm really glad that you brought this up. The idea that task switching is something that taxes your executive function and that it can have consequences for you throughout the day. Because I was reading about this, I realized, of course, task switching is something I do mindlessly all day. You know, I'm going between work and my email. If I'm watching a movie, I'm pulling up Instagram. And something that I took away from your book, and tell me if I'm understanding this right, is it's not just that I'm taxing my attention in that particular moment, but because I'm doing that task switching throughout the day, the consequences of that are actually with me all day, all through the rest of the day because that. Can you talk about what happens when what is happening in my brain or in my body when I have spent too much time, let's say in the morning, at an activity where I'm switching back and forth that I might feel the consequences of without realizing it in the afternoon or evening?
Yeah, so it goes back to that metaphor that I was using about the tank, the tank of resources. It's draining. And there's another thing that causes that tank to drain, and that's just a function of the amount of time that we're up since we woke up in the morning. So the tank naturally drains simply because we spend more hours awake, right? And we have to use some of our capacity while we're awake. But then on top of that, when we're switching our attention so rapidly, right, multitasking, and when we're not taking sufficient breaks, which is, pretty normal for a lot of people, then that tank drains fast and we get exhausted. And, we get stressed, but the real danger is doing this day in and day out is when stress gets to the point of reaching exhaustion. And then that can become burnout, and that's very serious.
Offline is brought to you by bookshop.org, local bookstore right in Larchmont that I love. Chevalier's bookstore, one of the oldest bookstores in Los Angeles.
Got a pretty woke sounding name, if you ask me.
Well, you know what? They got some pretty woke books too, because
Yeah, they do.
they've got Democracy or Else.
Oh yeah, they do.
And I signed some of them because I just happened to be there.
Oh really? Nice.
wasn't a planned signing. I just was
You
a
just took out
drive-by
that
signing.
Sharpie you have with you at all times.
Hey, are there any books of mine in here that
Just
could
sign a
be used
couple
signing?
books, sign a couple boobs, go home.
Whether you're searching for an incisive history that helps you make sense of this moment, a novel that sweeps you away, or the perfect gift for a loved one, bookshop.org has you covered. When you purchase from bookshop.org, you're supporting more than 2,000 local independent bookstores across the country, ensuring they'll continue to foster culture, curiosity, and a love of reading for generations to come. Big news, bookshop.org has launched an ebook app.
Wow, that's actually cool.
That
That's
is
great.
really
I didn't
cool.
know that. I'm going to use that.
You can now support local independent bookstores even when you read digitally. You can browse and purchase on bookshop.org and read right in your device's web browser. Or for the full reading experience, download the app for iPhone or Android. Every purchase financially supports local independent bookstores. Bookshop.org even has a handy bookstore map to help you find local bookstores to support in your area. Need some help picking your next read? The new books section of the website is updated weekly, so you'll always find something new and interesting to add to your library. Use code OFFLINE10 to get 10% off your next order at bookshop.org. That's code OFFLINE10 at bookshop.org. Offline is brought to you by Fatty 15. Have you heard about C15? It's an essential fatty acid that's naturally found in whole fat dairy products, but over time, our intake of these foods has decreased. Combined with the natural decline of C15 as we age, many of us aren't getting enough of this important nutrient. Introducing Fatty 15 C15 supplement, a simple way to replenish your body with this essential fatty acid. Co-founder Dr. Stephanie Venn Watson discovered the benefits of C15 while working with the U.S. Navy. Backed by science and supported by over 100 studies, C15 helps support cell function and resiliency and can be a valuable part of your long-term health strategy. Fatty 15 is vegan, 100% pure, and free from flavors, fillers, allergens, or preservatives. Just pure C15 in a gorgeous glass jar. It's designed to fit easily into your life, with refills conveniently delivered to your door, because even your C15 deserves to live the set-it-and-forget-it lifestyle. So do yourself a favor. Replenish your C15, restore your health, and let your cells do the heavy lifting with Fatty 15. Fatty 15 is on a mission to optimize your C15 levels to help you live healthier, longer. You can get an additional 15% off their 90-day subscription starter kit by going to fatty15.com/offline and using code OFFLINE at checkout.
Well, I want to ask you a little bit more about burnout in a moment, but just to spend a little bit more time on how we might be exhausting that tank without even realizing that we're doing it. Something that you mentioned earlier is that in some studies that you have conducted, something close to half of the interactions that we experience over the course of the day are self-imposed, which is something that you read it and you think, wait, that can't possibly be right. And then you go about the next day and you realize, oh, of course, I'm interrupting myself constantly all throughout the day. This is something I actually learned last year. We did as an experiment for the podcast. I switched to a flip phone from a smartphone. And something that I realized I was doing is I would be walking down the street in the elevator and I would look down and all of a sudden I would have the flip phone in my hand as if it was a smartphone that I could scroll through. And I started to realize, oh, I'm doing this constantly. I'm interrupting myself without even realizing I'm doing it. Why would I do that? Why do people interrupt themselves even though we hate interruptions and we know how costly it is for us?
Right. We're habituated to self-interrupt. I mean, there are a lot of reasons. We're bored, right? As soon as you start to become bored, it creates an opening for self-interruption, for other thoughts to pop into our heads. And, oh, I think it's much more interesting to look at the news or go on Wikipedia than to do the work I'm working on. Another reason is procrastination. So self-interruption is just a great solution for procrastination. You don't want to work on the task at hand. And so you self-interrupt. So it's basically that we're opening up our mind for all kinds of thoughts to pop into our heads, and we act on them. And we act on them because we're in front of the world's largest candy store. We can just easily go to a site and satisfy that curiosity.
Something I thought was so striking, and even though I just finished your book, I'm already trying to apply it in my day-to-day life because it was such an aha moment for me, is that the more non-self-imposed interruptions that we experience, the more self-imposed interruptions we put on ourselves as a result. And so something that I'm realizing now is that if I get interrupted 5 times in the morning by email, I'm now going to interrupt myself 5 more times in the afternoon because my brain has habituated itself to it, which is scary, but is also empowering because it means that if I could put in a little more effort to weed out those involuntary interruptions earlier in the day, I'm going to feel the effects throughout the rest of the day. Am I understanding that research correctly?
So what we did is we looked at our data and we looked at the number of external interruptions people had. So interruptions from all kinds of sources, email notifications, social media notifications, phone calls. And then we also looked at self-interruptions, where people are interrupting themselves. And as you describe, when the frequency of external interruptions declines, what happens is our internal interruptions, our self-interruptions kick in, and we do that more. And it's as though we are just determined to be interrupted. And the way I interpret this finding is that we have habituated to being interrupted regularly, whether it's by something external or something from within ourselves. And we continue that pattern, right? We are creatures of habit, and we continue that pattern because our attention spans just cannot hold out for longer periods.
Yeah. And that, I mean, I know you're going on vacation, so you're maybe about to experience something that I have experienced that led me to realize exactly what you're describing, which is that the first couple of days when I am quote unquote unplugged, I cannot get myself off of my phone because what I am experiencing, if I'm understanding you right, is that it's not just that, oh, the world is imposing interruptions on me. I'm actually addicted to those interruptions, and I will reintroduce them on myself. Now, the flip side of that, and the good news is that if I have been able to pull myself away for long enough, and maybe you're going on a nice long vacation, you'll experience this. I have actually found that I am able to break that addiction a little bit and stop interrupting myself. But I am realizing how much I am an accomplice in my own interruption ecosystem.
Yeah, of course. We do have the power and the agency to be able to pull away, right? And sometimes we need to remind ourselves of the fact that we do have that agency.
Right. So to follow up on the idea of burning out, and I think this is so important, which is, of course, the idea that all of this interrupting and cognitive drain leads to feeling physically and mentally exhausted, which is something, anyone has experienced, anyone can relate to. But something that you have said that I really wanted to follow up with you on is that burning out our attention doesn't just physically exhaust us, but can also make us feel cynical about the world. It can make us feel powerless or like we don't have agency. It makes us feel less able to gather the mental resources to deal with the world or to go out and to socially engage with other people. And I almost can't overstate how important I think this connection that you've made is. Like, we talk a lot on the show about the idea that there is, in some sort of way, a self-reinforcing feedback loop between our digital addictions and shattered attention, which then feeds into a culture of isolation and loneliness, which itself feeds into a kind of politics of cynicism and doomerism. But it sounds like those might be much more physically and viscerally linked than even I understood. So can you talk about this idea of a connection between burning out our attention and feeling cynical or a lack of agency in the world?
Yeah, that's right. It also connects to the idea of executive function, that when our executive function is just so fatigued, it just can't do its job to help our minds function the way they should. When people are burnt out, they are demotivated, they are disengaged, they just cannot, they don't have the capacity to be able to pay attention. So burnout is also connected with chronic disease. So being stressed and going to the extreme of burnout actually can physically harm our bodies. So it leads to cardiovascular disease. So it's not just in our minds, but, physically, our bodies can feel that effect.
So if I'm understanding you right, the kind of causal chain here is I do a lot of task switching in the morning. I'm on my email, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter. As a result of that, I wear out this kind of mental muscle of executive function, which is the part of my brain that helps me to stay focused on any given task, that kind of puts me in control of what I'm doing with my attention and my mind. And that I might be on some level emotionally interpreting my own lack of executive function, my own lack of self-control as something that has much wider significance, as feeling less in control of myself and therefore of the world. And that might make me feel more cynical about the world, more cynical about politics and what I can kind of do to affect the community around me. And then maybe as a result, instead of going out and seeing friends that night, which will help me recharge emotionally and feel better, I stay in and scroll my phone and end up feeling even worse.
That's a good way to characterize this cycle. So the definition of stress is when we just don't have the resources to meet the demands of the environment. Mm-hmm. And when a person is burnt out, right, it's this chronic inability to garner up the resources that we need to be able to address what's going on in the world. And that's why we can't be engaged. That's why we're cynical. Mm-hmm. It's a terrible situation to be in. And I would also say that another thing that feeds into burnout is the inability to psychologically detach from work at the end of the day. So, ideally, what we need to do is at the end of our, formal work hours is to detach and to do something other than work and, something other than answering emails or writing, but to really give our minds a chance to replenish. I also want to emphasize that it's not just our devices that leads to burnout. It's our devices on top of a layer of a lot of other things going on, right? People are already stressed from financial concerns, could be from relationships, conflicts, from politics. Mm-hmm. There's so many other things going on, and the use of the devices and wearing out our minds is on top of that whole other layer. So it's not just technology alone. Technology is a big part of it, but there's this interaction between what we're doing with our tech and all these other things we're experiencing.
Today's episode is sponsored by Acorns. Do you ever feel like you're not making the most of your money? Of course, right? You're either you're spending too much of it or you're keeping too much in savings. You're
buying high, you're selling low.
There you go. Acorns is a financial wellness app that makes it easy to start saving and investing for your future. You don't need to be an expert. Acorns will recommend a diversified portfolio that matches you and your money goals. You don't need to be rich. Acorns lets you get started with the spare money you've got right now, even if all you've got is spare change. You can create your Acorns account and start investing in just 5 minutes. Financial wellness doesn't have to feel impossible. Acorns gives you small, simple steps to get you and your money on track. Basically, Acorns does the hard part so you can give your money a chance to grow. Sign up now and join the over 13 million all-time customers who have already saved and invested over $22 billion with Acorns. Head to acorns.com/offline or download the Acorns app to get started. Paid non-client endorsement compensation provides incentive to positively promote Acorns. Tier 1 compensation provided. Investing involves risk. Acorns Advisors, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. View important disclosures at acorns.com/offline. Offline is brought to you by 3 Day Blinds. Tired of low-quality blinds that allow too much light in or barely provide any privacy? If your blinds are in need of an upgrade, but don't know where to start, we have the solution for you. There's a better way to buy blinds, shades, shutters, and drapery, and it's called 3 Day Blinds. They are the leading manufacturer of high-quality custom window treatments in the U.S. And right now, if you use my URL, 3dayblinds.com/offline, they're running a buy one, get one 50% off deal.
It's a bofo. It's a bo 50.
It's a bofo.
It's a bofy. It's a bofo.
We can shop for almost anything at home. Why not shop for blinds at home too? 3-Day Blinds has local, professionally trained design consultants who have an average of 10 plus years of experience that provide expert guidance on the right blinds for you in the comfort of your home. Just set up an appointment and you'll get a free, no obligation quote the same day. Apparently we've used 3-Day Blinds right here in the Cricket office.
Yeah. Yeah, we have.
You know where we could use it? In the office that you and me and Tommy share.
Yeah, you know what? Actually, you know what? This will be part of a 3-act story.
Apparently everyone else got them here, and they're great.
We're going to get, this is the beginning of a story. Part 1, we need blinds. All right? Part 2, it'll be off mic. We're going to get blinds. And then part 3, you're going to find out how it turned out. Because, Peter, we genuinely want to get 3-Day Blinds to install more kind of blackout shades in our office. I bet they could do that.
Because right now, we look like we're just a bunch of accountants sitting in an office
because of
in the 1980s, because we've had to move our desks certain ways because the sun
coming
is
in.
too much.
And so the three of us all face the same direction, like we're in the
like
movie.
Behind each other. I face the back of Tommy's head.
It's like we're all facing the same direction. We just need green visors. It's like we're in that desk scene in the movie The Apartment, which very few people have seen, probably know what I'm talking about. But we're all facing the same direction. It's quite stupid. So we're gonna get beautiful blinds from 3-Day Blinds, and we'll tell you how it went.
And I'll tell you, I've gotten 3-Day Blinds myself and love them. And they are very professional and very helpful, the people they send to put the blinds up. So I'm a big fan. If you're not very handy, DIY projects can be fun, but not measuring and installing blinds. That can be a big challenge. Well, the expert team at 3-Day Blinds handles all the heavy lifting. They design, measure, install. So you can just sit back, relax, and leave it to the pros.
Want to know something funny, John?
Yeah.
The book was called 6 Days of the Condor. And when they made it a movie, they're like, too slow. Now it's 3 Days of the Condor.
Like the blinds.
Yeah.
Right now, get quality window treatments that fit your budget with 3-Day Blinds. Head to 3dayblinds.com/offline for their buy one, get one 50% off deal on custom blinds, shades, shutters, and drapery for a free, no charge, no obligation consultation. Just head to 3dayblinds.com/offline. One last time, that's buy one, get one 50% off when you head to the number 3, DAY, blinds.com/offline.
I wonder if that feeling of struggling to disconnect from work at the end of the day might also extend to struggling with feeling like we can disconnect from the news at a time when that feels like something that implicates all of us in a way that feels kind of like work, because it feels like an obligation and it feels like something really important that we have to emotionally engage in. And I don't know about you, but I already feel on my best days like that is taxing 100% of my emotional resources. And on tougher days, I definitely don't have enough to deal with it.
It's absolutely draining our resources to follow news. Our culture is that of a productivity culture, right? And that goes back historically, the Protestant work ethic, and there's this pressure for us to be as productive as possible, which means we need to work as long as possible. But there's another aspect to it, and that's we're part of a busyness culture. And the business culture is that we have to occupy our minds every minute with something. And so if we're not occupying our minds with work, well, we turn to the news as a way to occupy our minds.
Right.
Right. So just pulling away from, any kind of tech and anything that's reminding you of work or what's going on in the world can help our minds recuperate.
Yeah, I would like to give everyone who is listening my permission to disengage from the news as much as you feel like you need to, because it's really important to being able to engage with the news, your loved ones, your work when you need to, because you have those finite cognitive resources. So you talk in the book about how there's actually a lot we can do to recharge those resources, which was good news to me, because it's easy to feel pessimistic because our environment has gotten so good at defeating our control over our attention, that there is actually a lot we can do to recharge it. Can you talk about some of those techniques?
Yes, there are things we can do. Let me start with something that I call practicing meta-awareness. Now, during the pandemic, my university offered us a course in mindfulness. mindfulness-based stress reduction, which I think probably a lot of listeners are familiar with. But it gave me this idea that we could do something related when we're on our devices. So mindfulness is about teaching you how to focus in the moment, right? You focus on things like your breath or your senses. But it occurred to me that when we're on our devices, it's also really important to be aware of what we're doing. And a lot of things that we do on our devices are automatic, like going to check the news or checking email or checking social media. And this idea of meta-awareness is to become aware of these automatic responses that we have. And when you can become aware of them, you can check them. And you can say, I have this urge to check the news. Do I really need to check the news? Is it going to be good for me right now? No, it's probably not. So if you become aware of your actions, you can become more intentional. When you're intentional, you can form a plan. And so I can say, okay, I am going to work 30 more minutes. And maybe after 30 minutes, I won't even have any urge to check the news. But I can give myself permission. Okay, I'm going to look at for 2 minutes. I'm going to glance at the news. What's even better is to step up, walk around, or go outside. That's an even better use of our time.
Why is that better? Why is going for a walk something that's better for our attention?
Because research shows that just a mere 20-minute walk in nature with some kind of exposure to nature can significantly refresh us. I've done research where we found that people are actually more creative. They have better, it's called divergent thinking, which is thinking of different ideas.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Just after 20 minutes. And you don't have to be in a forest or a park, but, having exposure to a tree or birds or, something that's nature related.
Huh. And that can also help recharge that tank of attention when it feels depleted.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's one thing we can do. Another thing we can do is to practice forethought. And what that means is imagining our future self at the end of the day. And I like to use the end of the day as a timeline. Whenever you have the urge to check news or social media, visualize where you want to be in the evening, how you want to see yourself, and really importantly, how do you want to feel? And I want to see myself relaxing on the couch. I like to, lean back on the couch and read something. And how do I want to feel? I want to feel relaxed, and I want to feel fulfilled and rewarded. And the last thing I want to visualize myself doing is working on a deadline at 10 o'clock at night, because I've been there and I know what that's like. And that's a recipe for burnout. And so this visualization, if you can make it very concrete, it's very powerful, and it can stop us in our tracks, and it can help us keep going. So practicing forethought.
So the idea is that imagining my evening as I want it to be will help me focus more now so that I can complete the task that I want to work on, and I will get to spend the evening as I wanted to and not catching up on work.
Yes, that's right. So, and again, the more concrete of a visualization you can make, the more powerful it can be. But it's a very, very good mechanism to use.
Well, I am already picturing myself with a glass of wine at the end of the day, so that seems like a perfect place to wind down. Gloria Mark, thank you so much for coming on Offline.
Thanks so much for having me.